And so sure enough, when I was 17, I had to get permission from both my parents to sign me away to go join. And I left January 26, 2006, and left from Tampa, Florida, and flew to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, which I love San Antonio. And I went through basic training and I loved it.
Today's guest is Chase Skylar DeMayo.
It's a very memorable sensation, and it ended up being, it was an air embolism. I was laying there dead for all they knew. I was a dead body that was transported off base. And
Chase is a U.S. Air Force veteran and near-death experiencer.
And I just kind of took a second to look around, and I thought, how beautiful this is, and the colors just don't exist here. I could vividly remember like a purple and a blue and a red, and of course tons of green because there was plants and trees. But it was almost like the colors had vibration to it. And I see way up ahead, I see a gentleman and a little boy.
My conversation with Chase is divided into 2 episodes. Our first episode is just him telling his story, uninterrupted. The second episode is going to be all the questions that I have for him. And now for my conversation with Chase Skylar DeMayo.
If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was 0 chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF Just Happened. Today I'm speaking with Chase Skylar DeMayo, near-death experiencer, and I met him in 2024 at the IANDS International Association for Near-Death Studies conference. Welcome, Chase.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to see you. It's been quite a few months since we've actually been able to sit down together, so it's nice to reconnect.
Yeah. They let you have these little, you can get extra tickets to these little very small lunches when you're there at people's tables and get to have really deep conversations. So I got a ticket. I chose to join your table and it was wonderful. So thank you for coming and having your little table.
Well, I was honored. I joke like, I can't even get my friends or family to have lunch with me, but I was fortunate enough at the conference that people wanted to sit with me and have lunch. And it was nice. There was people from all over. We had the woman to the left of me was from Australia. There was somebody that was had come over from Taiwan, and it was such a cool group of people at my table. I was blown away. So it was nice, and I'm glad that we got to connect.
Me too. Yeah. So now tell us a little bit about where your life was at leading up to your NDE.
Yeah. So real quick snapshot. I was born and raised here in Orlando, Florida, where I live again now. And big family, big multiracial family. I was kind of adopted by my grandparents, and they had adopted several other brothers and sisters of mine from all over the world. So I grew up in a big family. We went to church every Sunday, Catholic church. They used to bribe me to sit still and behave because I was the baby of the family. I was always the energetic, rambunctious one. They would bribe me with a breakfast sandwich, after church if I behaved. And that was kind of my, my experience with religion really my whole life was like, we go to church on Sundays and we didn't pray over our food. We didn't quote scripture or anything like that. So I think I kind of practiced religion like probably most Americans at the time, I think, where it was just kind of like check it off our list. We did it. We're great people, pat on your back. Hey, we went to church and that was it. And then the other 6 days of the week, we lived our normal life. My family, big history of service, whether military, my great grandfather served in the Navy and Iwo Jima. My dad, I call him dad, but he's really my grandfather. Like I mentioned, he served in the Army during like the Korean conflict time. And I was one of three boys out of all of my siblings, and my other 2 brothers were not going to join the military. And so I kind of thought, well, that'll make my family proud. I'll carry the legacy and join the military. So I had decided by 7th grade, which, here is like when you're like 12 years old, I'd pretty much decided that the military was my path. And decorated my room with posters of, the Navy SEALs and Marine and Recon and Rangers. And I mean, I was all in. I didn't do great in high school because my focus was like, as long as I pass high school, I'm going to go to the military. I'll do that for 20 years. And in my head, I thought I was going to be like the next Captain America. So I pretty much had my life set, and every opportunity in English class to write about what you're going to be when you grew up, it was some sort of military thing. And so sure enough, when I was 17, I had to get permission from both my parents to sign me away to go join. And I left January 26, 2006, and, left from Tampa, Florida, and flew to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, which I love San Antonio. And I went through basic training and I loved it. I rode home every day. I was having a great time, and just kind of felt like everything I'd prepped for. I had talked to recruiters and friends and family about all the tips and tricks to get through basic training, scot-free, and everything was going pretty well. And then my job after basic training was to become a SERE instructor. That's SERE. And you're basically, to really oversimplify it, your job is to help pilots who may potentially crash. You train them on survival tactics, or really any sort of air crew of, if you're going down, this is what you can eat, this is what you can do, this is, and there's much more to that role that I won't even, touch on just for time. But I thought that was like a really meaningful job. I got to be an instructor. And during that process, I injured both of my kneecaps. Both of my kneecaps ruptured out, and they said we would do surgery on one, and then we'll wait a few months for recovery. We'll do surgery on the other. Long story short, the first surgery didn't go well. I stood behind the surgeon, and he did the noise that you never want to hear a surgeon do. He just stood there and went when he looked at my MRI or X-ray, and I was like, well, that's not good. So they allowed me to pick any job I wanted, and they laughed because I picked journalist as my first option, journalism, photography, because I needed something.
Because you were no longer military eligible. After
exactly. Yeah. I needed something less physical, really. So I thought, hey, I really loved writing. My brother is a great writer. Like, let me try to see a writer. And they laughed and they said, there's no chance you're going to get this job. But sure enough, I got woken up one morning and they sent me to Baltimore, to Fort Meade, and outside of Baltimore, and I got to go to journalism school, and it was a dream come true. And it was a blessing in disguise. I hate to overuse that word, but life was good, and passed, and I got to pick my duty location. I picked it's Newport News, Hampton, Virginia, but I in my head I was living near Virginia Beach, so I was going to be on the beach and be in the military, and life was good. And once I got there, my job was incredible. I got to work with all of the news agencies, and I got to just do really cool stuff for my age. But the nagging issue was my knee, of course. Just because you're injured and you reclass your job, you still have to qualify using the rifle, the M16 at the time. You have to be able to run a certain amount of miles. And the knee injury was just continually kind of an issue. I went through rehab, but unfortunately the knee surgery had gone so poorly that one doctor said, and he was obviously exaggerating, but he said, you're better off coming in an amputee, and I could get you to run again, with prosthetics, than coming in with your knee currently. Just rehab wasn't working. And I felt like my time with the military was coming to a close. And that was really hard for me, because it was really, that's all I wanted, from 12 years old. It's all I focused on. It's all I told my family and friends. I'm leaving. I'm never coming back. I'll come home for holidays. And so I think that was the first time in my life that I really started to recognize that I was going into a depression, which was tough because I thought I was stronger than that. I had that male, like, macho, I can't be sad, and it was hard. And so I started to kind of slack off at work. I realized that they were going to retire me from the military. And I started saying, my mentality was terrible at the time, but I was, 19 years old. And I'm like, well, if I'm late, what are they going to do? They can't fire me. They're going to end up getting me out. And so one morning I was found unconscious on my dorm room floor. My supervisor, I was late for work. My supervisor had a key to my dorm room. I lived on base, and she found me completely unconscious. I was healthy at that time. They sent me to the hospital, and they had thought, of course, they check for the obvious things, right? When you're 19 and unconscious, is he on drugs? Is he drunk? Is it, they did all that stuff, and none of that was the case. I was really, really healthy, and I had a good head on my shoulders in regards to that, and so they hooked me up to every possible machine. They did everything they could to try to figure out maybe why I was unconscious. They thought maybe it was just a stress related, fall, and they just couldn't make sense of it. So I remember the nurse saying, "We're going to go get a mobile chest X-ray. We'll bring the machine in. If that comes back fine, we're just going to send you home because we don't really know what's going on." And so she fumbled with my IV. I had an IV in my arm, and she walked away. And that was kind of where really the story starts of how my life changed dramatically. Best described like something out of a TV show like ER or Grey's Anatomy or any sort of movie where the alarm started to sound, and my vision got really blurry, and things started kind of feeling warped, and things were going kind of side to side, and time really slowed down for me in those moments. As the alarms start going off and I'm feeling this really terrible feeling, I'm watching nurses and doctors start to kind of sprint into the room, and you could see the confusion and the kind of the panic on their faces. I remember all of their faces. I would be able to point them out of a crowd to this day. And that was 2008.
And you were seeing their faces normally, like out of your eyes. You weren't out of your body.
Yeah. And it's so hard to explain that, right? Because things were slowed down, things were blurry, but I could also hear them talking, and I could see their faces. It's such a weird phenomenon that I had never experienced, and probably really haven't experienced since then. Of things were fast, things were slow at the same time, things were vivid, things were blurry at the same time, which is, I check myself, I'm a skeptic myself, and I'm like, well, how is that possible? But it was my reality. And so they're all shouting at each other, and I felt somebody sit down to the left side of me. So, if you're recording, it's like this side of my arm. Somebody sat down to the left of me and began to stroke my arm really calmly. And I could vividly feel their touch. I could hear them speaking, and they said, everything's going to be okay. And they're calming me down. And I'm kind of like, well, that's nice. Like, all these doctors and nurses are on this side of me, and somebody is over here calming me down. Like, this is really nice. Like, I need this, And they said that air had traveled up my arm, and it was going to be incredibly painful, but everything would be okay. And so while I'm watching the nurses and doctors kind of panic over my body, I kept trying to go look at the person that was stroking my arm. It was definitely a male or a gentleman, but I just couldn't turn my head. It was like my head was being stopped from turning over. And, I'm like, whatever, if I can't turn my head, I can't turn my head. And I felt in that moment, this excruciating pain travel up, starting right here where my IV was, traveling all the way up my arm.
And for those of you just listening to audio, he's pointing to like his wrist, like inner wrist, just at the start of his hand. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So inside of my wrist, this excruciating pain traveling up my arm, and it felt like, gosh, it just felt like a silver bullet, a train. Something way too large for my vein going up my arm. And the pain is when I tell this story, and I don't tell my story too often, the feeling always comes back. It's a very memorable sensation of pain that went up my arm, and my right leg kind of, I think, just kicked up out of reaction. And I remember how awful it felt to feel this thing. And it ended up being, it was an air embolism. So air had gotten in the IV and was slowly traveling up to my heart to stop my heart, which of course was a purely an accident by the nurse that did it. And I hope at some point she hears my story and knows that I'm never upset about it. I think it was meant to be, but the air got to my heart. And right as I felt that pain hit my heart, I looked over to the left one last time to see who was stroking my arm, and there was nobody there. It was
And you were still feeling them stroking your arm, though. It wasn't like they could have stood up and walked away.
Exactly.
Okay.
They were still talking to me, almost coaching me along that everything was going to be fine. And yes, it's going to be painful, but don't worry about it. But when I looked over, it was really just kind of a curtain there. There wasn't even really room for somebody to be there. I'm sure if somebody wanted to squeeze in, they could have. But I'm certain I would have probably realized if somebody was like hovering over me, their body. But when I looked over, though, I realized that the monitor had completely flatlined. And, it's, you look at a flatline monitor and it's your monitor. And it probably took me a second to realize that I had just died. And at that time, when I had realized that the monitor was flatlining, I got the best feeling I've ever felt, and hard to mimic. Maybe second would be having my son, watching my son be born. This beautiful feeling, this cooling feeling in my chest, just kind of, it felt like my chest opened up. It felt happy. It felt refreshing. It felt peaceful. Of this feeling in my body that just was like, everything is fine and everything is okay. And, the voice to the left of me when they were telling me everything was okay, I was like, sure, the person I can't see said everything was going to be okay. And so before long, I mean, instantly, it just felt like this bright light had opened up almost. I can't say it like opened up the ceiling of the hospital. I was fully surrounded by bright light. And my body felt like it was traveling upwards, probably due to the lack of gravity, right? And I was surrounded by, I couldn't make out faces. I couldn't make out necessarily like body shape. It just felt like I was being surrounded by things, whether it was beings or it was just souls or spirits, or, I don't know how to explain it still to this day, since, it's been how many years. And this just beautiful feeling of like happiness and laughter and smiling and joy surrounded my body. And before I knew it, my body had landed in this beautiful garden, like stunning flowers and trees and dirt and a pathway. And my feet landed in actual dirt. And I personally, to this day, I hate being barefoot. I don't even wear flip flops unless I'm going to the beach, So I so remember my feet being buried in dirt. Probably because I grew up here in Orlando where there's fire ants everywhere. You just don't walk out barefoot in your front yard, And I remember the feeling of like, oh, this isn't a dream. I can feel this, the cliche saying of like, pinch me, I must be dreaming. Because if you can feel the pinch, you're probably not dreaming. I knew that I was feeling a real sensation in my body of my feet being kind of like gripping the dirt. And I just kind of took a second to look around, and I thought, how beautiful this is. And the colors just don't exist here. I could vividly remember like a purple and a blue and a red, and of course tons of green because there's plants and trees. But it was almost like the colors had vibration to it, which I know even saying that out loud, I'm like, well, what does that mean? But I was feeling the flowers, and I don't feel that even after my near-death experience. I don't feel that now. When I go outside, I have flowers right in front, kind of behind my monitor, that I can see, and they're beautiful and they make me happy and they smell great. But it's so hard because I actually felt like I was living with them. And so I'm looking around enjoying this beautiful garden or forest or whatever you want to call it. And I see way up ahead, I see a gentleman and a little boy. And before I could even really zoom in, my eyes are like really focus on seeing them. I could see them far, far away. It just felt like my body just kind of like zoomed, and I was like right there, right with them. And it was a gentleman in a robe, this, bright white robe, and a little boy in a white robe. And the little boy had bright blonde hair, and he seemed so happy. And I describe it as like this cheeky little, like maybe 4-year-old boy that was just being kind of naughty, but not really, he was just, he was kind of running away and just being really playful. And the man in the robe was just kind of had his hand behind his back and was just kind of enjoying watching this little boy play. And the little boy kind of tried to pretend like I'm sure the little boy thought he was running away, and getting far away. And he was looking back, and the gentleman in the robe was just chuckling to himself, like, let the little boy think he's getting away. And I'm just enjoying watching this. I'm watching this very like stoic, like lowercase stoic person, just watch this little boy be free and happy and just careless and no stress. And before I knew it, the gentleman turned and looked at me, and immediately I knew it was Jesus. And that's interesting for me, because had you spoken to me the day before this happened, which would have been like, start of April 2008, I don't think I would have ever in my lifetime thought I would have met Jesus when I died. I always joke, there was a Got Milk commercial, I think, when we were growing up, that showed heaven was like people eating milk and cookies. And I think like I had never thought about death up until that moment. I had never thought about what heaven would be like for me, if I would even go to heaven. I don't know if I was deserving of it. I had no preconceived notion of heaven or meeting Jesus or who I would meet. So I was shocked.
Hey, everyone. I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@WTFJustHappened.net and put science and spirituality.
I had no preconceived notion of heaven or meeting Jesus or who I would meet. So I was shocked. I was shocked that this gentleman turned to me, and I knew it was Jesus, just like if I look in the mirror and I recognize myself, like it was him. And again, that was surprising. I didn't grow up in a very strict religious household. So I was like, why am I meeting Jesus? Why is this happening to me? And we exchanged this communication, and we had this long conversation, and we didn't exchange words. It wasn't like you and I talking, Liz. Like it was just like this back and forth of like, oh, okay. And yeah, like it was very casual, and it wasn't uncomfortable. And it was like I had been speaking to him, or I've known him my whole life, which was interesting to me. When you talk to a stranger, we speak differently than if we're talking to a family member. And it was a beautiful conversation of, this little boy is you. And I was shocked. This little boy had bright blonde hair, and it wasn't until later on I realized I found baby photos of me having bright blonde hair, which, if you're listening to the podcast now, I have like dark brown hair now, and I've had really dark brown hair since I can remember. But when I was a little boy, I had a bright blonde mullet. It was the 90s, so.
And it was you as the little boy. You're saying that was actually you as a wow.
100% it was me, yeah. And I came to realize like, oh, I'm watching myself as a little boy be happy and free and be a little bit cheeky and just be living in the moment. And it was like, oh, okay, like this is really interesting. This is like a lot for me to think about. And Jesus in the robe, he didn't look like anything I grew up seeing. I especially in Catholic Church, when you walk into any Catholic church, you see a man typically on a cross in his like the worst possible moment of his life, right? His human life of, he's frail, he's suffering, like he's hung to a cross. And so you see this, the worst version of somebody, right? And that's how, at least the Catholic Church, Jesus is remembered. And this was a healthy man with piercing green eyes and like tight curly hair. And you're like, I know it's you, but you don't look like the person that I grew up recognizing, right? So I'm having this conversation, and everything was so surreal, and it felt so real for me at the same time. And he said, what I remember the most was, well, I remember two things. I remember him saying, when you get back, you have to spread light, laughter, and joy. And the laughter part stood out because I just remember thinking like, oh, that's not what I expected him to say. The laughter part was like a nice part for me to kind of take home and I guess metaphorically put in my pocket. Like, that's what I need to remember, is just try to make people laugh or make them smile. And then the second thing I remember of him saying was, it's time for you to go back. And he kind of tilted his head and said, you have to go back. And it wasn't a fight. I didn't say, oh, keep me here. I just kind of said, yeah, I know. And I just took it in one last time. And before I knew it, I was back in my body. And when we wake up from any great dream, let's say, you open your eyes and then you try to close it and you're like, give me one more minute, one more minute. Let me go back to that and just give me one more minute. And that wasn't going to happen. I realized, I opened and closed my eyes, and before long, really shortly, I realized that I am not in the same hospital room that I died in on the Air Force Base. In fact, I was in a completely different environment, and nobody walking by. There was a mirror to the right of me, or I'm sorry, a window to the right with blinds, and my body was not connected to any sort of equipment. I wasn't connected to an IV anymore. I didn't have a heart monitor on me. I had nothing on me. And I realized the people walking by, none of them were in uniform. And of course, when you're on a military base, at least half the people are in, at the time, we called them BDUs. Somebody watching this that's a veteran will laugh because it ages me, because we don't call them that anymore. But camouflage uniforms or some sort of military uniform. And I called out, and a nurse, I think a nurse, like popped in, and she looked terrified. She looked so confused and shocked, which looking back now, I laugh about. But I'm like, well, why are you confused? I'm confused. I'm not where I was. And she scurries out the room, and a doctor comes in, and the gentleman looks at me baffled and almost like he didn't know what to tell me. He didn't know what to say. He just said, I don't know what to do right now. So we're going to call the Air Force Base, and you're going to go back to the Air Force Base, and they can take care of you. He wasn't rude. I think I was laying there dead for all they knew. I was a dead body that was transported off base, and I've woken up. And I don't think that they were equipped necessarily to tell me anything. They're not a psychologist or therapist. They weren't a family member. My family did get called that there was an incident, on base, and that's all that my grandmother was the one who got the call, and that was it. It was back in 2008 where we still memorized phone numbers, which of course we don't do anymore. And I called a friend and I said, I just died. Can you pick me up, and can we go to Chick-fil-A? I'm starving.
Oh my God. I'm sure your friend was like, what the actual fuck? Yeah. Like, you died. I would think it was like, I'd be like, what party are you at? How many drugs did you take? And
Exactly. And they were, and they came to pick me up, and I was like quiet in the car, but I just didn't know what to tell them yet. I told them immediately. And then I did what any 19-year-old would have done back in 2008. I went to Facebook and I posted a picture of me, and I still had, my hospital band on, and I posted it. It says, April 2nd, 2008 was the date, and it says the day I practically died, and I posted it, and I thought it was funny. And the comments below it, and people, I tried to go back through Facebook somewhat recently in the last few years to find that date, and people were like, hey, seriously, can you stop dying? Everybody kind of made a joke about it, because I did. I made a joke about it because I just didn't know how to cope with it, and I didn't want people to think I was crazy. I didn't want people to judge me. So I was like, well, I'll just make a joke and just tell everybody I practically died, and here I am. And we went away. We went away for a couple of days to Washington, D.C., which is just a few-hour drive. And I posed with the monuments, and, I was just kind of my way of trying to figure out what the heck just happened, right?
Yes.
Right.
The edited, clean version of the title of my podcast.
Exactly. So I was so confused with what happened that I was like, well, I'm just going to get away from town, and then I'll go back and figure it out. And so we went back at the end of the weekend, and I went back to base, and I went back to the hospital, and they hooked me up with heart monitors, that you had to keep on 24/7 for, I think, 2 weeks. And then I went back not long after April 2nd. I went back probably a few days later. And because my left arm, where that IV had been and where the air bubble went through, was just so black and blue, it was hardened. So it was like a bruise that had basically almost become like a second or third layer of skin. Like it had just become so noticeable. And I didn't know if that was going to be like that forever. It certainly wasn't improving. So I went back and said, what is this normal? What can we do about this? And they wrote it, they wrote the whole recap of what had happened really in about a paragraph. Patient had, a cardiac arrest and is being seen now for, the ecchymosis or contusion or whatever, whatever wording they used on his arm. And I'm so grateful that they put kind of a really quick snapshot of what happened, because everything else was removed from my medical files. Even to this day, I've gone to the National Archives and requested all of my medical records. And when you get out of the military, you get sent all of your medical records, which hopefully help you when you go to the VA hospital and you give them your medical records and say, here's everything that happened to me. But those pages were removed for April 1st and April 2nd. Had I not gone back and gotten that doctor to write what had happened to me, I would have had no proof, and I probably would have kept my story to this day a complete secret. Because part of me is like, I shouldn't tell a story that I can't prove, right? So I am grateful that somebody put that in there. So that was April 1st, April 2nd, right? It was like that. I don't know how long I was dead for, unfortunately, because
and there was proof that you were physiologically dead. Okay.
Yeah, thank goodness.
And that's what it showed. Wow.
Yeah, and I had gone to a civilian hospital, of course, where my body was transported. And years later, I requested medical records from that hospital. And all I got back, they mailed it back to me, was a sticky note saying that there's no record of that patient ever being at that hospital, which is not true, because in 2010, so 2 years after this, I went there for a really bad car accident that I was in. I was sandwiched in the middle between two cars. I hit a car, they hit me. And so my friends and I all went to that hospital. It was the premiere of Iron Man, which is why I remember the very first Iron Man movie had come out. We were driving to go see the movie on like opening night. And so I was in this bad accident, and we missed the movie, and I was there for hours. And so I was at that hospital again, and they had written that they had no record of me ever being there. So that's, you can leave that, the viewers can leave that up to their own, thing. But, I was a young airman in the military who had died on base, and they transported me off base for me to be pronounced dead off base. So I'm not calling it a cover up by any means. And I have deep respect for the surgeons and doctors. Genuinely, there's no animosity towards them, but for whatever reason, a lot of that was removed. And so at least there's a small piece that is proven, and that I was seen in the hospital. So that was important to me. But by June, I was sent down to Texas to go in front of a board of generals and doctors, and they assign you an Air Force lawyer who was really great. And I'm young and naive, and they're talking in legal terms that I didn't understand. And they're like, show them your kneecap. And I showed them how wiggly my kneecap was, which makes me squeam even still. And the lawyer kind of did a fist pump, and we walked out of the room, and I said, well, what does that mean? And he goes, you're retired. This is great, man. Like, you have 40 days left in the Air Force and you're done. And now you get to start all over. And I stood there completely stunned. Like, wait, what do I didn't understand the gravity of the moment that I had just been given a 40-day notice to be fully retired from the military. And so I took my near-death experience and my experience, and I kept it a complete quiet and started to become kind of ashamed of it. Like, who do I tell? Who's going to believe me? And so I went on this selfish mission that I call, and I started doing stuff for myself. Anything that I felt like I missed in my childhood, I went backwards. I learned how to break dance, which I always laugh about now, because now if I tried to do it, I'm sure I would actually break something, which I know is cliche, but it's true. I was always intrigued by like photography, and I got to do like wedding photography and event photography for people. Um, I did, and then stand-up comedies. People in high school were like, "You're really funny. You should be a comedian." I'm like, "Why not?" So I took stand-up comedy classes locally in Virginia Beach, and I got to headline like the final show, and got to do all these really fun things that I felt like I missed. And I think it was due to my near-death experience, this kind of new lease on life that I had. But I did all of that, and people would be like, "How do you have the time? How do you?" What's your goal? And I'm like, I would just do something. I'd get really good at it. And then that'd be it. I'd just check it off my list and say, on to the next thing. And I felt like almost like a rhino charging with his head forward. I wasn't looking at where I was going. I probably hurt friendships doing that. I probably ruined some relationships, but it was just all about me going backwards in time and doing things that I thought were fun or fulfilling or I was going to miss out on. Because what if I died again? Would I regret it the second time of like, I didn't do anything? And I kept it a secret for the most part. I told people that I knew would trust me. My family knew about it. Ex-girlfriends that I had, I would share it with them because I felt like it was an important part of who I was, but I wasn't comfortable sharing it really with the outside world. And then just like weird little, coincidences would pop up, right? Like I went and worked on Carnival Cruise Lines, and I was sitting there on the phone with my grandmother, calling her and letting her know what was going on. It was a day that the ship was in port, so most people are off the ship, and that's the time where the crew members get to actually relax because there's no passengers, and you get to call your family up on the open deck and not get in trouble or anything. And the phone call ended, and this gentleman just walked past me and handed me a book. And it was In Life and Death He Leads. It was a story about a gentleman having a near-death experience. Just randomly handed me this little...
A stranger. No one you'd been hanging out with who maybe said something about you, just a random stranger.
Complete stranger. Never seen him prior on... those were like 4 or 5 day cruises at the time. And so he had come and gone. I never saw him again for that cruise. He just handed me the book and left. And I still have the book, in my bookshelf over to the right of me. And I thought, well, that's a really weird coincidence because this happened to me, and that was it. And I was so naive at the time of just thinking, well, I think it was easier for me to be naive and just think that it just doesn't happen to a lot of people. And that's it. Like I died, it happened. And there's not a whole world of people out there that this has happened to. It was so easy for me to just assume that it was isolated. And then little things like that kept popping up. So I remember vividly looking up into the sky and going like, what am I here for? Like, why did I get to come back? I really started to ask those questions of like, you had to have given me a second shot for something. Am I doing what you need me to do? And at that time I look back and I was entertaining every 4 to 5 days. I was entertaining thousands, usually 3,000 to 4,000 people every 4 to 5 days, people who save up their life savings. They work hard all year to go on vacation. And I was the guy, that was entertaining all these people on a cruise ship. And at that time, I just thought, well, this couldn't possibly be what I survived death for. It's got to be something more meaningful. Maybe I should go into clergy, and I really lost sight of, I'm sitting here making people smile and I'm creating memories for them. And I kind of belittled what I was doing as if like it wasn't meaningful to other people. So I got off cruise ships. I worked at Disney briefly. And then I went back and started working in corporate America because, in my head, I was like, I've got to grow up now. I've got to get a big boy job and take life seriously. And the fun is over. And I think it just crushed my soul, honestly. I lost that ability to entertain people or, really like in a mass way, make people happy. And so I went on this retreat, a veterans mental health retreat where they focus on breath work and camaraderie. And we did yoga, and most military men, like in my group at least, were like, yoga. And the instructor was great. She's like, look, if you think you're too cool, just lay on your back, close your eyes, and sleep for 45 minutes, like whatever, like she was the right person to teach it. And at the end of that 5 days, I came back and my wife was like, you are a completely different person. You've changed completely. Your energy is different. She's like, just the way you're moving and talking is like a different person. And I had finally given myself an opportunity to kind of just relax and make it about me for a few days. And within that time, they assign you like a counselor, a psychologist. You basically get 12 sessions as part of that, like, continuation. And I had never really talked to a therapist before, so I was like, whatever, I'll give it a try. And she's doing, her name's Angela Whittinghall, and I know she's okay with me sharing her name, but I got assigned to her, and she's doing my intake and asking me questions for the first hour. And she stops typing and she kind of puts down her pen, and she's like, "Can I ask you something random?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Did you have a near-death experience?" And I burst out into tears. Like it felt like 10 years of tears that just poured, like just uncontrollably poured out of my face. And nobody had ever asked me that, nor was I really come to terms that near-death experience was like a term that people used. So I just got super overwhelmed with emotion. And I asked her, why do you ask? And she said her husband, who is a police officer, had a near-death experience. And so I don't think she would have ever asked me that if she didn't know somebody personally. So our session ended, and I immediately searched near-death experiences veterans. And immediately I found videos of, rest in peace, one of the most incredible women, a mentor of mine, Diane Corcoran, who was a former president of IANDS, or International Association of Near-Death Studies, former president, whose life mission after serving in Vietnam as a nurse was to help veterans with near-death experiences. And I continued to cry, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And she's talking about in all these YouTube videos of things that I went through and the gap of care between, the military and how you get treatment for near-death experiences. And it was the same time as an IANDS symposium, I think, like a end of the year, kind of like a 1 or 2 day symposium. So I paid the money, I joined IANDS, and I turned on, the first thing that came up was a gentleman named Peter Panagore. And I heard his voice, and he was running a meditation, and I started crying again. And I was like, I don't think I could handle this. I was so, I had just, like I said, kind of naively just assumed that it was isolated and there wasn't this entire world of people who were a community of people that were there for similar reasons.
A lot of you have heard me talk about the Forever Family Foundation. They were absolutely instrumental in helping my grief and in changing my view of the probability of an afterlife. They use science-based testing to certify psychic mediums, have a scientific advisory board, and they host grief retreats. They will be hosting a special grief retreat this October in California, only for parents who have lost a child. The founders, Fran and Bob Ginsberg, who have become like parents to me, although Fran sadly passed in 2020, started the foundation after the passing of their daughter, Bailey, so helping grieving parents is dear to their hearts. This retreat will have psychic mediums and speakers. While they host many grief retreats during the year, having been through it themselves, they understand the unique type of grief and the safe environment needed for those who have lost a child. For more information and to sign up, go to foreverfamilyfoundation.org. I'll also have the link to this retreat in the show notes.
Just like I said, kind of naively just assumed that it was isolated and there wasn't this entire world of people who were a community of people that were there for similar reasons, whether supporters, people who had a near death or out of body or, spiritually transportive experience themselves, or doctors or clergy. There was just this whole world of people. It came so quick. And then in that same weekend, I got a message from Ancestry DNA. I did an ancestry test because like I mentioned, I'm consider myself adopted and did an ancestry test years previously. And I got a random message that same weekend that all of this is happening. And she's like, "Hi, I think I'm your sister. I've been trying to find you for years. And, I thought your name was something else. And I got the message and I was like, oh my, I don't think my body could, mentally, I don't think I could
Wow.
do this all in one moment. And so kind of skipping forward, she is my sister, never knew about her. And we've connected. Her family comes into Orlando, beautiful relationship now. So super cool. And then about 2 days after that, I started getting I started getting messages. I don't know how else to say it. A girl that I had known from Virginia, I was living back in Orlando already at this time, had gone missing. And I immediately knew what happened to her. I knew where her body was. I didn't know who to tell. I was like, how could I possibly know this? Like, how would I?
How did you know? Did she come tell you, or you just like the way a medium might get it, or you just a knowing?
Yeah, I guess a combination of both. I was scrolling through Facebook and everybody in Virginia, she was a really popular girl. Everybody was posting pictures of her saying, has anybody seen her? Has anybody? And so I'm scrolling. And as I'm looking at these photos from her, and I knew her too, I wouldn't consider us friends, but I knew her, and I immediately just knew. I knew the circumstance, and people were showing videos of her leaving with a gentleman. And they were all like, let's get this guy, let's get him, like, find him, who's this guy? And I knew that there was a different narrative, and I knew that there was a different story to her going missing. And I didn't really know, I'd never considered myself having any sort of spiritual gift. So I was confused. And again, this is all compounded within like a 5-6 day period of all these emotional things happening. And I'm like, gosh, there's a lot happening with my mind. So I reached out to somebody who on Facebook was kind of like the main guy, like posting about finding her, and he blocked me. He said, I don't believe in any of that, and then blocked me on Facebook. And I was like, well, that was crushing, and so I kept refreshing my feed to see what kind of came out. And sure enough, everybody started deleting their post about her. And then it came out, somebody finally had posted like, we've found her body. This is what happened. And it was everything that I knew prior. It was, wow. I could have written it down, put it in an envelope, sealed it, and, shipped it off. And it would have been exactly what I knew. So at the time I was really freaked out about it. I was confused, super freaked out, sad for her, of course. Right. So you're like, am I happy that I knew the truth, or am I devastated that I knew the truth? Right. Like, I knew what happened to her and it was awful. And so I was really confused, and I reached out to a spiritual friend, this girl that, is just a spiritual, like, out there, very open about her spirituality. And I said, something really weird is happening to me. And she's like, I know a friend from California. Her name's Diana Bamford. And she's like, she'll call you. And sure enough, within the next day, Diana from California called me. She's like, you've got something going on. You've turned your open sign on to your restaurant, and you don't know how to turn the off sign off. And you're going to go through so much spiritually, and you got to be ready for it. And you're going to have to protect. She went through all this incredible stuff that I'm glad I didn't just Google, like, she gave me like genuine advice, and we're still friends to this day. And she gave me all this great help. And I started to really come to terms with my near-death experience, for one, and two, how am I going to give this to the world? Right. Like, I had obviously kept it down long enough. I compare it to like at some point while we're all kids, if you're fortunate enough to get to go into a pool or a beach, you have a beach ball or some sort of ball. And we all think as kids we're strong enough to hold that ball underwater. And we see how strong we are, and we push the beach ball underwater. But what eventually happens? You let go and the beach ball comes flying up in the air. And that's exactly what happened to me. I had held this down for so long that finally, when I let go of the ball just shot into the air, way high up in the air. And at that, I was dealing with so many different emotions and thoughts all at one time. And I'm so grateful that I did. I mean, it changed my life. I started going to school for alternative medicine really shortly after. I said, okay, finally, I put off going to school because I didn't want to go to school just to make more money. To me, that was like the easy way, like, oh, let me go get a degree and that's just going to make me more rich. Like I didn't want to do that, but I also didn't know what I wanted to do. And I started to find my purpose. So I went to school for alternative medicine and then Metaphysical Sciences, graduate certificate from GCU. And this is all within like a 5-year period too. So I was going to 2 schools at a time on top of working full time. And then now we have a 2.5-year-old son. So it was a lot. But I finally started to find my purpose and I got more involved in IANDS and doing selective interviews with people that I really, really admire and appreciate, like you. And
I so appreciate you being one of the chosen few.
But it's true. I don't just say that. Like I joined Facebook groups pretty early on, and I started to feel almost like a guinea pig or a science experiment. When I would share my experiences, right. And then there's people who are understandably going through a lot that feel like maybe I'm the right person that can give them messages or help them find loved ones or help a suffering loved one. And I started to kind of go back into my shell when those things would happen because I got nervous. Like, who am I to give another person life advice, or who am I to? I'm just a, I'll always think of myself as a kid, right? Even though I'm getting a little
late. Yeah.
Who am I? I am not any more special than anybody else to help grieving people or curious people. So I kind of went through these little waves of almost being like a hermit crab, of going to hide in my shell and say, like, who am I to be sharing these messages? But then I would get really clear messages of like, no, this is what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be going out and doing exactly, like, hey, like in a joking way, like, don't die again to get another message. Like, let's figure this out.
There's easier ways.
Yeah, there's so many easier ways to just pick up on, these life's beautiful coincidences and messages. And when I became really perceptive to getting those messages, everything became really clear. And when I would fight against those messages, it would be really clear as well. Like, come on now, like you already know this is not just a coincidence. Like, there's more to this. And then I would say the best part is getting to meet this community of near-death experiencers and supporters and people interested in it. And I've gotten to talk to Johns Hopkins, and doctors and psychiatrists and people. There's obviously a big emphasis on supporting military veterans, which is what I feel like a big part of my calling is. And I geared a lot of my message towards specifically veterans. And then other people were interested in that story. So I started talking to other people and not just veterans, but, there's estimated numbers of 25% of all veterans have had some sort of NDE or STE, spiritually transformative event or experience, which makes sense, right? Like compared to a lot of jobs, we're very injury prone. Like we are in danger, whether we're in war or training. There's so many different instances of us being able to be injured, but then we're also one of the few careers where all of that has to kind of be kept a secret. If you don't have an outlet of going to find help, because if you go on base and find a psychiatrist there's psychologist, psychiatrist, or counselor, really any mental health worker, there's a genuine fear of getting kicked out and losing your job and losing your career and letting your team down. It's why a lot of veterans get injured and don't go to the doctor, right? Because you don't want to let your team down next to you. So I think there's a big emphasis on trying to support veterans and give them a voice. Unfortunately, when you're active duty and have an NDE, your options are very limited. I think there's anonymous groups to join, but unfortunately you have to be really secretive of that. And I understand that because I was in the military myself. I think if I had woken up and immediately told the doctor I just saw Jesus and myself as a little baby, no doubt that I would have been out of the military, and probably given medication, I can assume, to kind of silence that or, to kind of outcast me as this guy had this experience and lost his mind. So it was really tough for me, but now I feel really comfortable sharing my message, and especially because, again, I wanted the proof. before I started doing any sort of interviews or going out and talking about my experience specifically, was like I needed something tangible that if somebody said, oh, he's full of it and he's making it all up, that I would be able to, stand on something. So.
Oof. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So this was Chase Skylar DeMayo's fascinating story. Tune in next week and it will be part 2 where I ask him all the questions I was dying to ask him. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_ or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?